Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Social Contract, a Commander podcast. I'm Mike Allman, and joining me is my co-host, Alex Lapp. Alex, what's up, man?
Not too much, Mike. I'm happy to be here. And we got a little more of a lighthearted episode this time.
Yeah, it's going to be a good time. We're going to enjoy ourselves and talk a little bit about Commander that you might not... Okay, so we're going to get a little wacky with it, you're right.
It's Mike and Alex in the morning.
Yes, exactly. I don't have the soundboard set up with all of my wacky sound effects. Thank you. I appreciate it. So we've kind of established ourselves as... We talk a little bit about deck techs and, make sure that you have a certain amount of lands and stuff like that for being able to play the game. But I think our general consensus thought on every podcast that we do and what we want this to be is how to enjoy games more. Sometimes that's making sure people get to, like I said, put together their decks in a way that they're able to actually function and play the game. Sometimes it's exploring other ways of playing the game that you might not have thought about, like you talking about being more upfront and forthright with your intentions so people know what's going on. Today we're going to go a little bit off the beaten path, and we're going to talk about commanders that, if you were in the wrong setting, you couldn't legally play these. And there's tons of different, the Nephilim commander cards that aren't legendaries, but people like to play those because they're kind of a legendary in their own right. We're going to go even further, and these are legendary creatures, but we're going with the silver-bordered legendary commanders. Well, what we could make legendary commanders in the silver-bordered state. And some of these are kind of spicy. Like, I don't know why you couldn't run it right now. And some of them are just weird. And some of them are kind of a perfect combination of both. So we're going to parse those and see if it gives anybody kind of an idea on, maybe I could run this deck, or going outside of the box and seeing if you can make a deck that you wouldn't normally do. And Alex, this is one that you suggested. I was a little reluctant, I'll admit it. And then looking at these, there's like probably about 5 or 6 decks that I've got ideas for in my head now.
Yeah, Mike, a lot of these cards have a very interesting design space that you really don't see in Black Border, and that's really because R&D really sorts of takes off their own leash and goes a little crazy when they're designing these, and that really shows on most of these cards. This episode, I had the idea for this. You may recall a couple of years ago we had something called Silver December, which was when the Unstable set came out. The Rules Committee, which is the governing body of the Commander formats, had a event, I guess you would call it, where temporarily they made silver-bordered cards legal in the Commander format. It was my hope that they would take this time to sort of look over some of these cards and maybe consider some of them for legality in the format after the end of the events. But that didn't end up happening, to my disappointment. And I think that is especially disappointing because, as we'll see here, there are several of these cards that maybe with a little tweak here or there, they would be perfectly fine. And some of them that even without being tweaked, they're perfectly fine. I think a lot of these are quite interesting. We're going to go over every single one. There are 25 of them, and we're going to try to see what they do.
Yeah, and like you said, there are some that literally I could put them into a deck right now and not feel weird about it, and there are some that if I tried to put them into a deck, I wouldn't feel good playing it, and that's because of how bad I would make everybody else playing with me feel. So the amount of time that we'll spend on each one is going to vary a little bit, but without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it and start with A Cornelia, Fashionable Filcher. Man, I just realized how difficult some of these names are going to be. 3 generic and a black for a legendary creature, Squirrel. When you cast a spell with a squirrel in its art, you get an acorn counter. Whenever a squirrel you control enters the battlefield or dies, you get an acorn counter. For 2 generic and a black, pay X, acorn. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn. For a green, pay X acorn. Target creature gets +X until end of turn, and this is a 3/3 creature. Alex, how many squirrels are there in Magic?
There really aren't that many squirrels, and that's something that I think is to the dismay of many a tribal deck brewer. I think we all remember fondly the Cardboard Crack comic where an Emrakul is taken down by 15 squirrels.
Correct.
That's just fantastic. But this card, if we're looking at the power level of this in a silver border environment or even in a black border environment, I think that you would agree that as written, it's really not that strong. This commander has 2 activated abilities. One of them is functioning as removal, -X removal, and one of them is functioning as a buffer, +X pumping effect. And that's on an individual basis. We're talking about building up resources over time. You have to cast your squirrel spells and your squirrel themed spells. And then once you've done that enough times, then you get the payoff of being allowed to activate one of these abilities and either remove one creature or pump one creature. So I think that you might agree this is definitely on the modest end when it comes to power, even in a squirrel tribal deck, which is, I think, really the only way that you could run this card. This is really not off the rails. It's not that unreasonable. To make this card legal in Commander, I think that the Acorn counters are fine. The symbol of the Acorn counter, it has a little acorn.
It is
that
cute.
Might be a bit of a problem. It's a little bit silly. I don't think that's that big of a deal. We have many different kinds of counters that can be given to both permanents and players. Energy counters, experience counters, +1 counters, trample counters.
Literally everything from Ikoria, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So an Acorn counter is really not that far beyond the pale. I think the only real problem with this commander is its first ability, its triggered ability. Whenever you cast a spell with a squirrel in its art, you get an Acorn counter. I think that would just unfortunately need to be dropped because that effect is not really kosher for Black Border.
Yeah, I mean, here's the weird thing about this card, and we'll move on from it here because we've got 24 other cards.
Yeah.
But I do like this one a lot. If you replaced Squirrel in its art with literally just about any other tribe that even sees some play, this card would be bonkers.
Yep, Squirrel's not a very well supported tribe.
And, you know, even if it turned into, like, instead of when you cast a spell with a squirrel in its art, if it was just whenever you play a card that has a squirrel in its art, I would be totally fine with somebody having a whole bunch of lands that just had squirrels. You know what? I'd co-sign on that. Go for it. So, not one that'd be very viable, but it's a fun idea. It's a fun effect. Just, unfortunately, we didn't get there with squirrels, but hey, dogs and cats. We got that tribe going now. So
living together.
We're going to get there slowly, bit by bit. Next card here. Alexander Clamilton. This is 2 generic and a blue for a legendary creature. Clamfolk Advisor Rebel. Whenever you cast a wordy spell, scry 2. A spell is wordy if it has 4 or more lines of rule text. For 1 generic and a red, tap it. Choose target creature you don't control. Reveal the top card of your library. Alexander Clamilton gets +X/+O until end of turn, where X is the number of lines of rules text of the revealed card. Alexander Clamilton fights that creature. This is an 0/4. So it's a scry and fight kind of commander. It's literally Alexander Clamilton doing duels. And the art is fantastic, what with the water gun. Go ahead, Alex. Unpack this some for me.
Yeah, I think this is definitely one of the strangest Izzet commanders that has ever been printed. This is nothing like any Izzet commander that exists. Izzet commanders are usually more interested in spell slinging and storm and pinging and drawing cards, things of that nature. and this doesn't really do any of that.
No.
This is scry and fight. I would say that this card, as it's written, it would need some pretty significant changes to become sort of black border legal, as we'll call it, because wordy is not. That's not good. A spell is wordy if it has 4 or more lines of rules text. That's not going to work. My recommendation, if you wanted to sort of change this to make it more okay in black border, would be replacing the number of lines of rules text, which of course changes based on
Oracle text, how old the card is. There's and then you get into a conversation.
Card.
Yeah, sure.
You could change that to be how many abilities a spell has. Abilities here can be on a spell or a permanent. That's based on how many different paragraphs of text it has.
Mm-hmm.
That has not been done before, but that's something that is consistent and is a lot more easy to wrap your head around, and I think is a little bit less silly. I've realized that by making them less silly, we're kind of robbing the magic out of these cards, but in my opinion, the goal here is to see if we can make these okay for Commander, and I think that change, to reiterate, whenever you cast a spell with, we might say, 3 or 4 abilities, however they want to do that, scry 2, and then his fight ability would be this card gets plus X plus O until the end of turn, where X is the number of abilities that the reveal card has. I think that might edge it a little bit closer to okay.
Okay, so Alexander Clamilton, I like it as a concept. I like the idea of a fighting is it commander, and the whole dueling aspect is really cool, but a little difficult to pull off. So, who lives, who dies, who tells your story? Not necessarily this time. So our next one is Baron von Count. Alex, I'm a big fan of this one. Generic.
Absolutely, Mike.
1 generic, 1 black, 1 red, legendary creature, human villain. Baron von Count enters the battlefield with a doom counter on 5. Whenever you cast a spell with the indicated numeral in its mana cost, text box, power, or toughness, move the doom counter 1 numeral to the left. When the doom counter moves from 1, destroy target player and put that doom counter on 5. This is cool. I'm a big fan. Alex, take us through this. I'm a big fan of this one.
Yeah, this card's fantastic. The origins of this card actually go way back. Mark Rosewater, who's the lead designer for Magic, quite a long time ago, had a bit of a survey on his blog, which has been running for many years. He was asked which color or which group of colors would the effect destroy target player be in, and the answer, of course, was Rakdos, black and red. I think that anyone can agree on that. Now, destroy target player in this case is just a very fun way to say that player loses the game. It's the exact same effect. Now, I love destroy target player, but it would probably need to be changed to that player loses the game. The target player loses the game. And honestly, with very minor changes, because when they say put a doom counter on 5, if you look at the art of Baron von Count, he has sort of these orbs in the background of his laboratory that have the numbers 1 through 5 on them, and you're meant to put a counter on those numbers in the artwork and then move it along those numbers in the artwork, which works great for silver border because it's a very informal thing. Mm-hmm. But if this were to be a much more official card in the style of black border, we'd have to work out kind of a different system. It could be a 6-sided die, which we don't have yet, or it could be a number of counters like doom counters, count down from 5 to 1, remove a doom counter each time. However, the casting a spell with the indicated numeral in its mana cost, text box, power, or toughness, completely fine. This card, with barely any modifications, would be a completely viable Rakdos commander, and quite a fun one at that. I believe Jimmy and Josh over at the Command Zone, which is the most popular command podcast out there, they actually made a deck tech for Baron von Counts.
Yeah.
You can go ahead and check that out and see what they did for it. But of course, ideally, if you were to build this deck, you would want to have a nice sprawl of numbers 1 through 5. And I think they did find a couple of cards that actually have all 5 numbers on the card, so it could function as any of those numbers.
Yep. So, couple quick asides. First one, I forgot to mention, it's a 3/3 for 3 mana. Cool. Second, Villain is an awesome creature type, and I really wish that we saw it more often. Third, I kind of want to disagree with you on the, maybe change the text to target player loses the game. I love the idea of destroy target player, just because that opens the door for another card in the future to say target player has indestructible, and I'm a big fan of that too. This is a really cool card because, like you said, there are, I don't know how many Rakdos commanders there are off the top of my head. This isn't my favorite one of them, but I would build this and probably play it more than most Rakdos commanders I can think of. So it's a cool concept. It's one that could easily fit in the game. I guess the only thing I'd say is that you have to do something where the Doom counters can't be reduced by any other effect. Otherwise, it would get kind of weird if you can just be like, oh, I'm going to remove a counter because blank. Just specifically for the spell effect itself, but I like this card. It's cool. Moving on to Dr. Julius Jumblemorph. 2 generic, 1 green, 1 white for a legendary creature, 4/4. Dr. Julius Jumblemorph is every creature type, even if this card isn't on the battlefield. Whenever a host enters the battlefield under your control, you may search your library and or graveyard for a card with Augment and combine it with that host. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. Alex, I don't understand any of the words that I just said. So, help me out here.
Yep, so we'll go ahead and start from the top here. Dr. Julius Jumblemorph is every creature type. That's a characteristic defining ability, and that basically means that no matter where Dr. Julius Jumblemorph is, he's in your command zone, in your graveyard, in your hand, on the battlefield, any zone in the game, he's always going to have every creature type. He's a shapeshifter, he's a changeling. And he's definitely not the first creature to have this ability, but that's just worth going over briefly. His second ability here, his trigger, whenever a host enters the battlefield. A host is a type of card that only exists in Silver Border, and it's sort of a system they have where any host can be combined with any augments to sort of make these creature mashups, as it were. And again, that system really only works in Silver Border, where you have these types, and it's a little bit silly in Silver Border. They have only one of the cards has a mana cost, and only one of them has its rose text on one side and then on the other side, and to kind of put them together, and they it's quite a silly thing, but it definitely works in Silver Border because those card types exist. You combine these two cards, and if we were to modify this to make it work in Black Border, we would basically have to change the host and augment parts to something that exists in Black Border, because presumably we're just talking about making these commanders into legal cards. We're not talking about all the many, many hundreds of different Silver Border cards. That's a little bit too into the weeds for this episode. So if we were to change that into something like that he's a meld tribal commander, or maybe a mutate tribal commander.
I was thinking mutate, except for the every creature type.
Mutate doesn't really care about I guess
non-human,
you wouldn't be able to mutate onto him.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's okay.
Sure.
Not every commander needs to be the center of the deck. This would just be able to two-direct or mutate creatures. It would be a little anemic because there's really very few mutate creatures, but I'm sure they could figure something out.
Sure. It's a cool idea for a card. It sounds like it'd be difficult to pull off without changing a whole bunch of stuff, though.
Yeah.
Next one, we're going to move on to what I think is my favorite art, but not my favorite commander here. Frankie Peanuts. 2 generic, 2 white, legendary creature, Elephant Rogue. It's a 2/3. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may ask target player a yes or no question. If you do, that player answers the question truthfully and abides by that answer if able until end of turn. So I feel like this is a card you could get real creative with, but I don't know if I just don't have the galaxy brain to make it work. So help me out, Alex.
Yeah, Mike. Really, the issue with this card is that it really has no sort of limitations on it.
Right.
You kind of have it set up as kind of a truth or dare kind of thing, where as written you could ask players questions about themselves, personal questions, instead of questions about the board state or things they have in their hand,
Sure.
Now, believe it or not, this kind of effect is not completely beyond the pale. Obviously, as written, this is completely inappropriate. You would never see print in black border. You can't just be like asking somebody what color their underwear is, But there is a card I'd like to bring to your attention that you may have seen. It's called Liar's Pendulum.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a 1-mana artifact. And it has the activated ability to and tap it, name a card, target opponents, guesses whether a card with that name is in your hand. You may reveal your hand. If you do and your opponent guessed wrong, draw a card. Now, this card is quite interesting and quite unique, and it doesn't really line up with what Frankie Peanuts does. But what I think it demonstrates is that this kind of effect could possibly be translated to black border mine.
Sure. When I'm looking at this, I turn it into it's a yes or no question kind of thing. So the yes or no questions that you have to ask are things like, are you going to attack me with all your creatures next turn? Or are you going to attack me next turn? And if they say no, cool. You kind of have your own little weird, Teferi's protection from that player's creatures for a turn. You could also say, are you going to cast a spell 5 CMC or higher next turn? Stuff like that. And I get that. But then when you get into the abides that answer if able until end of turn in a card like this, in a format like this, where it's like, well, I was, but now if I don't, I die. But that means that you're still able to not do it. But it's a weird card. I feel like there's a cool list that exists somewhere as far as awesome things to do with this. And for the record, holy cow, is this a mono white card? Because it's taking the most mono white thing I can think of and making it weirder in yes or no taxes, essentially.
It's like a zone of truth.
It really is. And it's cool. I don't know if I could build it, but I'd like to.
It definitely has it has issues, fundamental issues, but I think that it's not beyond repair. A card with this same kind of feeling could exist.
Yeah.
And that's why I bring up the Liar's Pendulum.
Sure. No, it's very specialty, but I like it. Moving on to our next one here. This is one of the more famous silver border legendaries, I think. Grimlock, Dinobot Commander. 1 generic, red, green, white, for a legendary artifact creature, Autobot, 4/4. Dinosaurs, vehicles, and other transformers, registered, creatures you control get +2/+0. For 2 generic, and convert a Transformers toy you own to its other mode, Grimlock, Dinosaur Leader, becomes Grimlock, Ferocious King. Flip it to the other side. Grimlock, Ferocious King, is an 8/8 legendary artifact creature dinosaur with trample. Pay 2 generic, convert a dinosaur's toy you own to its other mode. Grimlock, Ferocious King becomes Grimlock, Dinobot Leader. So they don't have a werewolf commander. They have tried to make werewolf tribal a thing. Brawl and doing it with planeswalkers has helped a little bit, but I don't think there's a ton of options for werewolf. So what they decided to do was, hey, we're going to make a werewolf commander, but it's an Autobot, and it cares about other Autobots in Unstable. It's a fun card because you literally get to play show and tell with some of your collection at home, I guess. Go ahead, Alex. Tell me why this does or doesn't work.
Well, Mike, the problem with cards like this, and there's another one like this that we'll talk about soon, is that it's referencing objects that are outside of the game of Magic. So obviously that's kind of a non-starter. However, I don't think that it's beyond repair because, like you said, this is most analogous to werewolves, which are a breed of double-faced card that transform. And there are definitely other transforming double-faced cards, and we just got modal double-faced cards that don't transform, which I won't talk about. But as it's written, really it's not going to work. But rather than paying the cost of convert a toy you own to its other mode, it could be that you pay the cost of transform a permanent you control, and that would allow this commander to transform. And I think that minor change wouldn't even really take much away from the flavor of this card, and it would make it a lot more sort of comprehensible.
I feel like if you literally took every word on this card that said Autobot or Transformer and you turned it into Werewolf, this would be a really fun commander. Like, day one, just, okay, cool, yeah, let's do this, you know? I like it, but yeah, the whole having it exist out of something else, and I don't know, maybe because you're playing this as a commander and you bring your Transformer registered, you bring that toy over, and then one of the other players at the table just says, "Hey, can I see that?" and then doesn't give it back to you. Well, now you're just stuck. It's a cool idea, at the very least. Moving on to another Rakdos commander that I'm a big fan of. Rakdos of this set. It kind of makes sense because Rakdos is the chaotic, let's do some weird stuff colors as far as I'm concerned. We're going to move on to Griselda Monster Masher. 3 generic, 1 black, 1 red for a legendary creature, zombie villain. Another reference of villain, big fan. Combined, enchanted, and equipped creatures you control have menace. For 3 generic, a black, a red, and tapping Griselda, put 2 target creature cards from graveyards onto the battlefield combined into 1 creature under your control. Its power is equal to their total power. Its toughness is equal to their total toughness. And it has their names, mana costs, types, text boxes, etc. for a 4/4 creature. So this is graveyard stealing mutate on a commander that also gives menace to things that do so, and other benefit, and anything that's enchanted, equipped, etc. This is a cool card. I like this card, Alex.
I agree. This card is quite interesting. Rakdos, when the gloves come off for Rakdos, you really start to see some interesting things, like Griselda here, and Baron von Count and Zansha, the sleeper agent, things like that. Mike, this card basically works as written, which is quite exciting, I think.
Right.
You could print this card in black border. Now, obviously, there needs to be a rule in the official rules, and I'm sure there is, because they do add silver border rules to the comprehensive rule set that basically describes the intricacies of what the combined word means and what it does. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, this card is completely... Print this bad boy. This girl is great. Her name is kind of evocative of Brizella, which is a famous meld creature.
Yeah.
Combination of those 2 angels. I like this, Mike. I really like this.
The idea that this is literally the Monster Masher is fun.
Monster Mash.
If you just looked at an effect, Alex, would you pay 5 mana to combine 2 creatures from graveyards onto the battlefield under your control?
Mike, are you kidding me? 5 mana is the going rate to steal a creature from another person's graveyard and just take that.
Exactly.
2 creatures for 5 mana? Are you serious?
And it's repeatable. And when you do it, it has menace. Like, this is just a cool card.
This is a strong card.
Okay. I think I'm focused on Griselda because the next one has just enough text where I'm probably going to screw up 45 times, so bear with me, everybody. Is it Jalum Grifter?
I believe so.
Okay, so if it's not legal, so don't at me. 3 generic, red, summon legend. For 1 generic and a red, you tap him. Put Jalum Grifter and 2 lands you control face down in front of target opponent after revealing each card to him or her. Then rearrange the order of the 3 cards as often as you wish, keeping them on the table at all times. That opponent then chooses one of those cards. If a land is chosen, destroy target card in play. Otherwise, sacrifice Jalum Grifter, and it is a 3/5. So this is just a commander that does 3-card Monty.
Yeah, 3-card Monty is a very famous grifting game that you might see on the street corner that appears to be fair. and a guy's friend comes up, you don't know he's his friend, and he wins the game, and then you go up and you do it, and you lose the game because they're cheating. Mike, this card is... I'll just go ahead and say that this card's not okay. Because this card is, I think, most closely akin to dexterity cards like Chaos Confetti, Falling Star, Chaos Orb, and cards of that nature. Because this card is completely inaccessible to players who are blind or hard of seeing.
Sure.
There's literally no way that a player with difficulty seeing would be able to interact with this card. And if anybody's curious, there are some videos out there that maybe we can link to of blind Magic players. And typically what they'll do is they'll stamp the name of a card in Braille onto the sleeve, which works great for them. But obviously that's not at all viable with Jowling Grifter.
Sure.
I think for that reason, this card's just... there's really nothing that can be done, unfortunately. It's a really funny idea, but this card would never be able to be legal.
Yeah, I mean, like, I get what you're saying, and I'm with you on it. Goblin game exists, and I know that there's ways to get around that too. It just... I don't know. There's too many hoops for anybody to jump through for this to make sense at all, even though it's a cute idea. I don't even know if it's a good idea. It's a cute idea.
Well, Mike, Goblin Game is pretty fundamentally different from that. Even though Goblin Game is the most silver border card ever printed in black border,
right?
And Ristic Studies has a fantastic video about this. But when it's played in a sanctioned environment, which it seldom is, typically, I don't know if you have Goblin Game pulled up or not, but basically with Goblin Game, you're playing a gambit where you hide objects and you guess a number of objects and lose life equal to that guess, and then the person who
hides the least,
the closest, also loses half their life total. It's just kind of a silly card that involves referencing outside objects. When that card is played in a sanctioned environment, what the judge would have you do is write down a number and keep that number secret.
And that's what I was referring to, where it's like there is a card that says do this thing, which is absolutely not something that every player that can do, but they've made workarounds for it to where it's still a card that exists and it says do this, but instead of hiding objects, it's writing down a number. It's doing something along those lines. I don't think you can really do that with this card.
Right.
Like you can't.
The idea of this card just kind of makes that not really possible.
I mean, I guess you as the owner of Jowling Grifter could write down a number 1, 2, or 3, and then the other player could pick a number. But even then, like it's.
But that's not how 3-card money works.
Right, and that's kind of where it's like, okay, this is a little more off base than I'm happy with.
I think we can agree that it's a really flavorful idea. It's just not going to be able to be ever legal.
Yep. So let's go ahead and move on to. I don't know if flavorful is the right word, but it's definitely kind of on the nose here with Johnny, combo player. 2 generic, blue, legendary creature, human gamer, cool creature type, not as good as villain, but fun. This is a 1/1 for 4 generic. Search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. So, I mean, it's literally what it says. It's a combo player commander. It just tutor for 4, get the things, put them in your hand.
Yeah, exactly, Mike. If Johnny could design a card, the quintessential Johnny, and for those who don't know, Mark Rosewater describes 3 different core kinds of players in the game, and one of them is Johnny, who's very focused on the technical aspect of deck building and the technical aspect of creating combos. And if that archetypical person were to design a card, it really probably would be quite similar to this. Search your library for a card, put that card into your hand. Mike, this card's completely fine.
Sure.
Except for the gamer subtype, which doesn't exist. Everything about this, totally fine. Now, would you be focused all the hell if you played this in your commander game? Yeah, but I would say this is roughly as oppressive as Urza, and Urza's legal.
That silence is me having to think about, if this was on the table and Urza was on the table, which one would I be targeting first?
That's a good question. I think I'd pick my cards up at that point, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say I think what my target is, taking my cards and targeting them to go back into the deck box and me finding a different table. The fact that you don't have to tap them or anything is just like, okay. But at the same time, it'd be very silly for me to get upset about how broken a card is that is not legal in our format on purpose, compared to a card that is broken and is on purpose, not banned. Anyway, Johnny, cool. Go for it, combo players. Moving on to another cool Rakdos commander here, Marry or Kill, which I love the wordplay there. 5 generic and then a black or red for a legendary creature. Say it with me, human villain. For 1 generic and a black or red, switch a Killbot or Marry or Kill in your hand with 1 on the battlefield, and this is a 5/5. So this is like non-attacky ninjutsu, but for Killbots, which, okay. I like the idea. This is cool. If the creature is tapped, the switch creature is tapped. The same is true for untapped, attacking, blocking, enchanted, equipped, and targeted. Any counters on a creature, any counters on a creature are on the switched creature instead. So it's a full-fledged exchange. Talk to me, Alex.
Yeah, Mike, this is definitely a very interesting mechanic, and it could definitely be incorporated into Black Border. Now, rules would need to be written for this because this effect simply does not exist.
Right.
Ninjutsu and Commander Ninjutsu and the related effects absolutely do not inherit the status of that card, and they definitely don't inherit the counters of that card. That's completely different from anything that's ever been printed before. Something I would like to note is that when you reference in this ability switch a Killbot or Marry or Kill, specifically that would be referencing a creature type. So a creature type Killbot or a creature type Marry or Kill. Now, as far as I know, there are no creatures with the creature type Marry or Kill. So I believe designers meant to say is switch a Killbot or a card named Marry or Kill.
Right.
With 1 in your hand or 1 on the battlefield. I could be wrong about that. I don't have all cards with creature type Marry or Kill pulled up on my computer right now.
Mm-hmm.
But Mike, help me out here. What? I'm going to ask a stupid question. What wordplay do you mean by Marry or Kill? Help me out.
Well, I'm thinking of Marry or Kill. Like that game.
I understand.
I understand.
That went right over my head.
I don't even know if that's actually what it's referencing, but I still like it. So I just decided to roll with it.
I don't see how that really is incorporated with her effect, but I'm willing to believe that.
Well, that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm putting this out here, or I'm putting a Killbot. So it's Marry or Kill.
Okay.
But
I get you.
I don't know. It's a weird effect. I like the idea.
Mike, Rakdos is getting all the fun stuff today.
Well, we'll get a little bit further down and give some shine to a couple of other cards, but so far it's the clear winner in my book. Not a Rakdos card here is our next one, Nightmare Moon. This is 4 generic, black, for a legendary creature, Alicorn. 6/6 with flying. As long as it's nighttime, Nightmare Moon gets +2/+2 and has menace. For 6 generic, transform Nightmare Moon. Any pony may activate this ability to help pay for the cost. And it's not any space pony, as in 2 words, any pony, 1 word, may help you pay for the cost. When they do, they become your friend. Which, so far, card is already winning as far as I'm concerned. But it flips over into Princess Luna, legendary creature, Alicorn, 4/4 with flying. When this creature transforms into Princess Luna, choose up to 6 cards you own from outside the game with a moon in their art, then exile those cards. As long as those cards remained exiled, you may cast them, and your friends may cast them with your permission. In parentheses, gifts are appreciated. Not in flavor text, just parentheses. What?
Yeah, this is part of a.
We'll get to the rest of them. There's a couple more.
I'm not going to go into those right now, but this
sure.
is part of a secret lair set themed around My Little Pony, and so it has this kind of. They really went all out. They
sure
redid the card
did.
Frame. They redid the set symbol. They did the watermark. Even the hollow stamp is in the shape of a heart. And as you can see, rather than saying any player, they said any pony, one word. Yeah, wow. So this card has a lot of issues that would really make it not really appropriate for Black Border. Number one, as long as it's nighttime, that's not really a thing. Now, any player, and I'm going to say any player, they activate this ability or help pay for the cost. That does have a precedent. We talked about this a couple of episodes ago with the assist mechanic. That's okay there. It would need to be retemplated, but that's definitely not without precedent.
Sure.
The friend system, I'm not really familiar with that. Now I realize that sounds pretty incriminating. Saying like I have no friends.
I was gonna say I don't know what you're talking.
I have no friends.
I don't know what you're talking about. Anytime I sit down, everybody I'm with is my friend. So
absolutely,
I don't feel cool putting a title on it.
But the idea of a friend being codified into Magic,
right?
As far as I know, there's no actual rules around that.
Player type friend.
Yet this card really would need to be completely torn down and built back up, which would kind of ruin the idea of it. But I'm sure it's quite flavorful for the franchise. The Pony franchise.
I'm not going to lie. I have other thoughts on this card, but we also have, I think, 2 other My Little Pony franchise cards to get into.
Yeah, we got a couple more.
So I'm just gonna keep going. To Old Buzzbark. This is a X and 1 red, 1 green legendary creature, Goblin Warrior. These are all things that make sense so far in our format. When Old Buzzbark enters the battlefield, roll X 6-sided dice onto the battlefield from a height of at least X inches. For each die, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the result on each creature you control that die is touching. For each die, Old Buzzbark deals damage equal to the result to each creature an opponent controls that die is touching for a 3/3. That's a whole lot of schematics on rolly dice.
Yeah, this card is most analogous to Chaos Orb.
Yep.
Which is a dexterity card. It's banned in every format that involves dropping the card physically from a height above the table and destroying, or in this case, dealing damage to each permanent it touches. As we talked about with Jellum Grifter, dexterity cards are pretty much verboten. I don't even think it's really appropriate to be printing these in silver border, but I mean, they're meant to be silly and not really played, so I guess that's neither here nor there. But of course, dexterity cards will immediately make it not possible for anybody with limited range of mobility or paralysis or anything like that. They wouldn't be able to play the effect. So, of course, this is pretty much a non-starter mech.
It's a cool concept as far as I'm concerned. As far as like, hey, you're basically playing craps, throwing a bunch of dice onto the table and seeing what happens. But regardless, that could get destructive too, depending on how big of a table and how many people you're dealing with.
Yeah, Mike, I've played with, you might have heard of gravity dice and other metal dice that are extremely heavy, and I've seen them dent tables. And if they drop those on your cards, they might permanently damage those cards. That's another issue to consider.
Yeah, I've got some D20s that I'm pretty sure if I rolled them the wrong way at somebody that they're dealing with a concussion. So
it'd technically be a war crime.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to let Old Buzzbark go by the old wayside and move on to it's early to say this. I think this is my favorite concept of a card on the silver borders. We'll see. Maybe we'll re-examine and talk about that. I think we should just go ahead and plan on, hey, what's your favorite commander? What would you build a deck out of if you could? But we're going to move on to Phoebe, Head of Sneak, as an acronym, SNEAK. That is 1 generic, 1 blue, 1 black for legendary creature human spy. Again, all stuff so far that totally works. 2/3. Phoebe, Head of Sneak, can't be blocked by creatures with flavor text. Well, alright, we're starting to go off the rails. 2 generic, 1 blue, 1 black. Phoebe permanently steals target creature's text box. That creature loses all rules text, flavor text, and watermarks. This creature gains them. One quick aside, there's a lot of good flavor text in these cards as well. I do like that the flavor text for this card is "this space intentionally left blank." Oh, this is a cool card.
Yeah, like this is a great design for a card, and it's not even Rakdos, so
right.
That's definitely a plus. Now, as you noted, the first one's kind of right out. Magic cards in Black Border can't reference flavor text,
right?
Because flavor text is not part of the rules text of a card. However, the activated ability is definitely not out of left field, because we do have cards that become copies of other cards. That's a very normal effect.
Mm-hmm.
You have, I'm sure there's some I can come up with at the top of my head. There's the Guild Mage from, the Guild Master from Dimir. Help me out, what's his name?
Lazav,
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Lazav Dimir Mastermind can do a very similar effect to this.
Yeah.
There are other cards that do that too.
You've got Volrath,
yes.
Can do that with the counters. There's creatures that say it becomes this, except for it retains this thing's name. So
right.
There's a similar effect that already exists. This is just
basically
going for
the way
it.
That you would template this in Black Border is that Phoebe becomes a copy of that creature and has this ability to blue-black Phoebe. And then it would also have the clause that that creature loses all abilities and its name and its type, which also is not something that's unheard of either. We have humility and similar effects, turn to frog, that make creatures lose abilities and types and things of that nature. Mike, this card with some fix-ups, some minor changes, this could be totally fine.
Yeah, I think if you just flat out transferred it, it might be a little powerful with the whole, not having to tap it effect. But it's still a 2/3. Like it doesn't say it takes its power and toughness or anything along those lines. It's cool. I think this would be a really weird but fun Voltron commander to play around with. Because then, the problem with, I have a couple Voltron decks, and I like souping up the big beefy creature or even the really tiny germ and turning it into stuff. But the problem is that you can kind of know what effects you're going to get. This would be the ultimate Voltron commander in that you literally have no idea what this is going to turn into. You just know that it's not going to be Phoebe, Head of Sneak by itself for very long. I like this card.
It's a little bit like Mutate.
Yeah, I could see that. Moving on, we got another dice-based creature with Pippa, Duchess of Dice, 2 generic and a green for a legendary creature, Human Noble, 2/2. For 2 and a green, tap Pippa, roll a 6-sided die. It becomes a green die creature token with power and toughness equal to its result. For 2 and a blue, tap Pippa, re-roll any die. Odd little bit of text here saying activate this ability only anytime it makes sense. Sure. I mean, I do not want to re-roll a die when I have not rolled a die, but fair enough. I could see this being kind of neat. This is a little weird, but I kind of like it.
Yeah, absolutely. In Magic, we do have coin flip mechanics, and those are well represented. Maybe not in the commander sphere, but across many different cards reference coins being flipped. And we don't currently have rolling dice in Black Border, but that would definitely not be that difficult to add as a system. And her idea of her activated ability, rolling a die and then creating a token with that much toughness and power, that totally works. We have coin flips that do very similar things. And re-rolling a die, we have Croc's Other Thumb. or Krark's left thumb, whatever the black border one is. That allows you to flip a coin again. That effect exists as well.
I think that's just Krark's thumb. I think it's just his first one, and then his other one is the silver bordered weird one.
It's just Krark's thumb.
Yeah.
Then the silver border is Krark's other thumb.
Right.
But yeah, Mike, this would just need a section in the rules that detailed how rolling dice works, and with that, this card would be completely fine.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't know. I think this is kind of a fun. I'm going to pay 3 mana and potentially get a 6/6. Might get a 1/1. It's a cool tokens idea. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know that I'd build it, but I would be very interested to see it piloted.
It's definitely more interesting than the Simic Commander that just got leaked, which I won't really go into because it's a leak, but suffice to say it does things that you would expect a Simic Commander to do, and this card really doesn't.
Fair enough. Moving on, we're going back to the Pony universe. I'm going to make so many people mad by not knowing, so I'm just not even going to try and delve into that.
Do you really care that much?
No, but you know what? The last thing I want to do is make people feel that I'm insulting something they care about when That's the entire thing that we're doing is, hey, here's how to have more fun with the thing that you care about. So what I'll do instead is I will politely say, my bad. And if you're still mad at me at this point, well, it's on your fault. You suck. Princess Twilight Sparkle, 1 white, 1 blue for a legendary creature Alicorn, 2/2 with flying. Other Alicorns, horses, Pegasi, ponies, and unicorns you control get +1/+1. And for Wooburg, if you control Applejack, Fluttershy, Pinkie Pie, Rainbow Dash, and Rarity, every pony wins the game. Okay. Those are my thoughts on this card. Alex, what do you have to add?
Mike, I'll just say again that they templated this wrong. You would need to say if you control a card named Applejack, a card named Fluttershy, because as it's written, you would need a card with the creature type Applejack,
right?
Creature type Fluttershy, which they didn't mean to do that. But I will say that if this card were in black border and it weren't My Little Pony themed, and it was referencing cards that exist because, to my knowledge, Applejack, Pinkie Pie, honestly most of these, I think all except Rarity, they don't exist.
Right.
So they're without Spy Kid or the Silver Border card with no name, there would be no way to successfully activate this ability. However, that being said, all that being said,
other than the fact that it can't work because those cards don't exist, continue.
Right. Other than the fact that this card literally can't ever work because those cards do not exist, and also it's My Little Pony themed, which for me is kind of a reason that I wouldn't want to play it. But that might be different for somebody else. The rules text, everybody wins the game.
No, excuse me, everybody?
Yes, Mike, everybody wins the game.
I'm looking at it.
Each player wins the game.
I'm looking at it. It says every pony there, Alex. I don't...
Why are you doing this to me, Mike?
All right, continue, Judge.
Each player wins the game is quite possibly the best sentence that has ever been printed on a Magic card.
Second only to every pony wins the game.
Oh, my God.
So we're going to move on to one of the cards that actually does exist here as a part of that, and it's Rarity. We were just talking about you. One generic, 1 white, 1 blue for a legendary creature Unicorn. So we're moving towards the creature types that actually exist again. For a 2/2, rare and mythic spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Pay 1 generic and tap Rarity, and you reveal a My Little Pony toy you own. Until end of turn, another target creature gains protection from each color in that toy's coat, mane, and outfit. God. Alex, I'm struggling here. I practiced reading these out loud, and sometimes it's just I'm trying to get all the way through it, and it's hard, man.
You're having some trouble, but I don't really blame you, Mike, because these aren't really normally words that you read on a Magic card. Now, obviously, rare and mythic rare are not characteristics that a card has. You would never see this printed on black border, and this is referring to the rarity of the card as distributed in set boosters. But surprisingly, the expansion symbol of a card is a characteristic of a card.
Yeah,
and it is a copyable characteristic. You might be aware of the card. I think it's a Golgothian Silex that destroys all cards from a certain expansion.
Huh.
And the expansion symbol on the card, which is on the type line to the right, is in actuality a real part of the card that is copied when you become a copy. It's a copyable characteristic. So I guess it's not entirely beyond the realm of believability that rarity as a trait, not rarity the card, could become a characteristic.
Sure.
That's not unthinkable. However, it currently isn't. And also, this is referencing toys outside the game, just like Grimlock.
Yeah.
So that's kind of straight out. However, you could, in theory, rewrite that ability to reveal a creature card of one of these creature types that these ponies care about from your hand, and then each creature you control gains protection from the colors that creature is. If it were green and black, for example, gain protection from green and from black. However, as written, this card doesn't really work much.
So let me pitch you on something weird then. Let's say that they figure out a way to just, you know what, we're just going to keep the first line of text. The rare and mythic rare spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, okay? Mm-hmm. Just pretend that's fine. If instead it said, pay 1 generic, tap it, reveal a rare or mythic spell in your hand until end of turn, another target rare or mythic creature gains protection from each color in that card's color. I mean, you'd have to really word it weirdly, but I feel like you could make this card work if you changed the outside toy issue. But even then, that's a stretch. I'm trying so hard.
A bit of a can of worms, Mike, because the rarity of a card is not part of its, I guess you would say, its oracle text. And one of the reasons for that is that cards can be upshifted and downshifted in rarity as they receive reprints across different sets. For example, in one set a card might be a mythic, and then in another set it might be a rare or an uncommon even.
There you go. I tried, My Little Pony fans, I tried to make it work, but man, it's difficult. And you know who you can blame for that? Our next card here, Richard Garfield, PhD. 3 generic, blue, for a legendary creature, human designer. 2/2. You may play cards as though they were other cards of your choice with the same mana cost. You can't choose the same card twice. Mana cost includes colors. I mean, this is completely unplayable, right, Alex?
Yeah, Mike. This this might be a little bit confusing to what people are saying, because this could mean any number of things as it's templated, but what it means is that you can play a card and then just pretend that it's another card in the game of Magic with an identical mana cost. So Richard Garfield, PhD, is 3 blue. That happens to be the cost of Force of Will, correct? Force of Will's 3 blue.
Sure is.
So you could play him like his Force of Will. And his flavor text is, and yea he doth spake, let there be magic. As Richard Garfield is the creator of Magic the Gathering. And in the art here we have him as sort of a patron saint of Magic.
Yeah.
And he has a halo with the 5 colors
on
it.
I am a big fan of the mana symbol halo. I will absolutely give him that.
And even his type line has sort of the biblical old-timey drop cap for the Ellen Legendary. It's a very fanciful and fun card, but Mike, this card could never be legal.
No, it's terrifying in general.
Yeah.
At the very least, if you played it, at least you would be restricted to blue. So there is that.
Oh,
it's only
thank
just
goodness.
It's
you're
only
restricted
just
to blue.
Right. It's just only every blue card that's ever been
the
printed.
most fair of all the colors.
Well, speaking of fair, Should we move on to our next card?
Shall we?
Which I don't even know if this is more or less legal. We go to Spike, Tournament Grinder, 2 generic and 2 black Phyrexian for a legendary creature human gamer. So, hey guys, we've got at least 2 now. Phyrexian mana can be paid with either a black or 2 life. For 4 Phyrexian, choose a card you own from outside the game that has been banned or restricted in a constructed format, reveal that card, and put it into your hand. This is a 1/1 creature. Go ahead.
So, Phyrexian mana, Mike, as I'm sure you're aware, is, historically speaking, probably one of the most broken and strongest things that has ever been put into the game. A lot of people might say that it's a mistake, and I think they're really playing off of that here.
Yep.
Because you can see that Spike costs 2 and 2 Phyrexian black, which means that she costs 2, and
yes.
She has an ability for 4 Phyrexian black, which means the ability costs 0. And wow, it's a wish effect, but it only wishes cards that are banned. That's just kind of funny. This is a funny card.
Oh, it's great.
And,
I love.
And even her T-shirt says "Nope."
Yeah, which is a blue. It's a blue shirt.
Yes.
Everything about this card says be illegal in the format, or as close to broken in the format as you possibly can. Which is why it's Spike. I get it. This is a fun card. If anybody ever sat down and asked if they could play this card, just leave. Don't.
The answer's no.
Don't even adjust to the no, play a different deck, because if they want to play this deck, all of their legal decks are also going to be very, very, very not fun to play against. So
yeah. I want to reiterate that wish effects do not function in the game of Commander.
No, banned cards also do not function in the game of Commander.
Yeah. She has Black Lotus sleeves in the art, I can see.
Yeah. I mean,
perhaps the most famous card in the entire game, and banned.
I think if it weren't for like the very arrogant smirk that she was wearing in the art, maybe I'd be a little bit less abrasive, but probably not the more I think about it. Moving on to our next card here. We're going back into the realm of possible ? Stet, Draconic Proofreader, 4 generic, red, for a legendary creature, dragon, good, bureaucrat, okay, 4/4 with flying. Whenever Stet, Draconic Proofreader attacks, you may exile a card from your graveyard. When you do, Stet, Draconic Proofreader deals 4 damage to any target whose name begins with the same letter as the exiled card. And then for a white, delete the first letter of target permanent or player's name until end of turn. So obviously, not something that you could just run right out of the run right out and play, but this is cool. I like manipulating the words on cards a lot, so sell me on why I can't play this.
Well, Mike, we actually get pretty close to playable until we get down to that activated ability.
Yeah.
Because the name of a card's name is a characteristic of a card, and it is always the English name of that card, incidentally. Sure. Now, deleting letters out of a name and out of a player's name, which kind of might start causing some existential crises.
Oh, I've got some thoughts on that. I'm real excited. Keep going.
It has its issues, Mike. I will say that even though there's no way this card could be playable, this is perhaps the most unique Boros commander we've gotten since Feather the Redeemed.
There's someone in my play group named Jason. Nothing would make me happier to delete 2 letters from his name and then just make him my son for the entire game.
Oh, wow.
And then burn him with anything that has S in its name. This is a weird card. It's cool. you can't play it, but man, it's cool. Moving on. Man, how do I even say your name? Okay, so
it's the full name as written.
I know, but I'm so we're going with Surgeon General redacted commander for 3 generic and a green legendary creature, Wombat Bat Chameleon. This is a 3/3 that says whenever you augment, enchant, or mutate a creature you control, draw a card, and you can tap it and add 1 of any color to your mana pool. One of the things that's pretty interesting in there, Alex, is that it specifically says mutate. When did this card come out?
Mike, this card came out in, well, it came out before Mutate.
Right?
Mutate came out this year, and this card came out a year or 2 ago.
So the silver border can be a little bit of forecasting of what's going to happen. So pay attention, guys. Go ahead, Alex.
That's definitely a throwback to the Steamflogger Boss, I believe is the name of the card. It was the only black border card ever released in an unset other than basic lands, and it referenced assembling contraptions, which is a mechanic that was exclusive to Unstable.
Right.
But it didn't exist in the unset it came out in, which was a previous unset. So we went many, many years with a black border card that had a silver border effect that didn't exist. And now we have another card that has a silver border effect that became black border. Mutate came out in Ikoria. Mike, this, except for the augment, which doesn't exist in black border, you can just take that out, and this card's totally fine.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. This is just a Enchantress mutate commander that taps for mana. Cool.
And it has a color identity of Wooburg.
Yep. Yeah. Like I this is just a card that enables you to. I almost consider this bear with me because I know it's not. I almost just consider this, an enchantment in itself that just says draw a card when you do the thing that your deck wants to do. Just happens to have a power and toughness and taps for mana. I like that kind of commander. It's just enabling you to do something that you already want to do.
Sure.
Yeah, it's cool. You could absolutely out of the box just play this, and I'm sure something that's 5 colors that says draw a card whenever you do something is absolutely something that doesn't ever get broken in any way, shape, or form. Sorry, I almost got through that without dying. Moving on to our next commander here, Circadian Night Owl. See, it's funny because it's a bird night that you play.
That one I do get.
Yeah, for 3 generic white. It has Night Lifelink, which, again, cool name. Damage dealt by knights you can control also causes you to gain that much life. For a white, Circadian Night Owl gains Vigilance until end of turn. Activate this ability only from sunrise to sunset. For a black, Circadian Night Owl gains Flying until end of turn. Activate this ability only from sunset to sunrise, and it is a 4/4. Other than the timestamp on there, you can just play this card, can't you?
Yeah, of course, just like with the My Little Pony card, you can't reference times a day in a Magic card. That's kind of understood. But if you simply remove that text, said for a white, this card gains Vigilance, for a black, this card gains Flying, and it had the clause or the ability, damage dealt by knights you control also causes you to gain that much life. Now, this isn't a very good card.
No.
But this is an extremely playable card if you remove those things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's if you said, hey, this is a 5-mana 4/4 that gives knights lifelink. You can pay a white to give it Vigilance. You can pay a black to give it Flying. Okay. I mean, that sounds like a card in Magic. It sounds like a card that I don't know that I'd necessarily put into anything. But sure, that could be a card. It's weird. But again, I do like the Night Owl and the Nightlife Link. Those are just fun things to say. So next we're going to go ahead and move on to, unfortunately, our last villain. This is The Big Idea. 4 generic, red, for for legendary creature Brainiac Villain. For 2, and then 2 black or red, tap it, roll a 6-sided die. Create a number of 1/1 red Brainiac creature tokens equal to the result. Second ability, tap 3 untapped Brainiacs you control. The next time you would roll a 6-sided die, instead roll 2 6-sided die and use the total of those results. And this is a 4/4 creature. This sounds like it could get pretty nuts if left unchecked.
Yeah. Again, just like with the Queen of Dice that we were just talking about earlier, as long as we write in how 6-sided dice work in the game of Magic, this card is completely workable, and it even has an ability that's somewhat similar to Krark's Thumb.
Yeah,
this is a Rakdos token commander, and this basically works.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately as awesome as Rakdos has been, this is the least interested I've been in the Rakdos commanders that we've talked about. And that said, it's still pretty cool. It still does something. So I think Rakdos is the big winner of this, at least in my opinion. We'll see if my play group has any problem with me playing one of these commanders and then see who the real winner is. But yeah, again, villains and Rakdos. Good job, Silver Porter. Next commander we're looking at here. Oh no, this isn't even a commander. This is just
it is.
This is
It is.
Okay, so next card we're looking at is the Grand Calcutron. This is a white and blue legendary artifact. When the Grand Calcutron enters the battlefield, each player's hand becomes a program, an ordered row of revealed cards. Players can only play the first card of their program. If a card would be put into a player's hand from anywhere, that player reveals it and places it anywhere within his or her program instead. At the beginning of each player's end step, if that player's program has fewer than 5 cards, he or she draws cards equal to the difference. So, first off, Alex, how is this commander?
Well, Mike, you didn't read the Oracle text.
Oh.
This card has been errated, and that errata has the clause, the Grand Calcutron can be your commander.
Oh.
And even before it had that clause, it had a ruling, a gatherer ruling that said the Grand Calcutron can be your commander. So, believe it or not, this legendary artifact can in fact be your commander. And the fact that they cared enough to write that clause just further empowers our mission to make as many of these cards legal in Black Border as possible. Because this one, they signed off on it, Mike. They said it was okay. So let's talk briefly about what is perhaps the single most interesting Azorius Stax commander ever printed.
Yeah, go ahead.
So first ability, when this card enters the battlefield, each player's hand becomes a program. So basically that means you reveal your hand and it remains revealed. And at that time, you'll choose an order for your cards to be in, read left to right. And you can only play or cast the first card in that program, that'd be on the left side. So what you would probably want to do is arrange... I know that when I'm playing EDH, I have my pet way that I like to arrange my cards. Typically what I'll do is I'll put my lands in one spot all together, and then I'll have my cards in ascending CMC. But that really isn't how you would want to have your program ordered.
No.
You would probably want to intersperse your lands, do some mana weaving in your hand so that you're able to hit a land drop each turn. Because if you put all your lands on one side of your hand like I do, well, you'd pretty quickly be saying land go, which would kind of suck. But yeah, there's definitely some strategy to speak of when you're arranging your cards. If a card would be put into a player's hand from anywhere, that player reveals it and places it anywhere within the program. That makes sense. If the order of your hand matters, then putting a card into your hand or drawing a card, you would need to be able to control where that card goes.
Right. The tape doesn't just necessarily go from left to right at all times. You add new information in, and then you continue from that point.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then at the beginning of each player's end step, if that player's program, their hand, has fewer than 5 cards, he or she draws cards equal to the difference. That sounds a lot like Damia Sage of Stone.
Yeah.
To me.
So,
but it's for the whole table.
So here's where I'm at. You said that this is the most interesting Azorius Stax commander.
I'd say so.
I have a counter for you.
Okay.
I think this is the most interesting anti-Stax Azorius commander.
Anti-Stax.
Because you know what makes really, really difficult for everybody at that point? Where do you put your counterspell?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to put it where you expect to want to use a counterspell, and then if you don't use it, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah. This is A, big fan of anything. If you're going to do stacks, it has to affect everybody. And this affects you. B, this allows you to draw cards if you're playing stuff because it's rewarding you for getting around the actual program that you've made, which is pretty fun. Okay. We're going to have a revelation here. I think I'm going to make this deck.
What, like actually build the deck?
I think I'm actually going to build this deck. And I'm gonna build, and I'm gonna get permission from my play group. I'll build this deck. This will be the only silver border card that's in there.
Now, listeners, this is an historic moment.
Oh,
because Mike has just said that he agrees that this is a Stax commander, and he's going to play a deck helmed by this commander.
I'm gonna try it. And I'll
Mike,
tell you,
I think you're going to have a great time, and definitely share the list when you have it.
Well, here's what I'm more focused on. I think I'll have a great time. I think I will have a great time up until the point where I look at somebody else's face at the table, and they are locked out of being able to do anything until they draw several more cards. So I think what this is going to be is I think this is going to be a group hug Stax commander. If that makes sense. I'm going to do lots of prosperity, everybody draw cards, and all this other stuff. And we're going to see if we can make this work out. All right.
I think that's, like you said, running counterspells would be extremely problematic in this deck.
Oh, yeah.
You would definitely want to run counterspells that are on permanence, like Lendra.
Yes.
So that you wouldn't be sort of locking yourself into, I need to counter something this turn, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you'd like just having generic counterspell in hand. You would at a certain point you'd be like, okay, well now it's number 1 in my program, so everybody knows that. But here's the other thing:
modal counterspell. You
could. But what I like about this is that I love the telepathy effect. I love being able to see everybody else's cards. So when you're building your program, you're actually looking at everybody else's cards on the table. This has more interaction without actually interacting than any other card I can think of.
This card's great. I love this card.
It's
2 mana.
It's so weird. I like it. Okay, we're going to have more discussion about this, and we'll come back to it in the future after I make it. But we're going to move on to...
have a deck tech video.
Yeah, we're going to move on to the complete opposite side of the spectrum here with Timmy, Power Gamer. 2 generic for a green legendary creature, human gamer. It's a 1/1 for 4 mana, generic mana. You may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. The end. Alex, I don't have any problem with this.
No, Mike, that's Elvish Piper.
Yeah.
And incidentally, this might out me as a Timmy. Elvish Piper is probably one of the coolest designs for a card.
Yeah.
Which is a elf with the rules text, pay a green and tap it, and put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. It's exactly this. I would say of the 3 types of players, Timmy, Johnny, and Spike, I'm probably closest to Timmy. I'm going to be honest. Maybe I got a little Johnny in there, but no Spike, mostly Timmy. And Mike, this card's fine to play.
Yeah, I like Synergy a lot more than I like Rah. But I think I'm still closer to the what would you call it? To the personality type, to the even.
Oh, you're definitely all Timmy.
Yeah. I'm very excitable. big battle cruiser
and
badgery.
Like your big splashy. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, you don't have to tap it, so it's cool. It's a repeatable effect. It's a 1/1, so it still dies real easy for something that, has a really powerful effect. I'm totally fine with this. I almost wish now that there was a fourth player type, so you could just have an EDH game of that.
Fourthos.
Yes. But I don't, because I'd feel really bad for Timmy. And probably whoever the other fourth player was for the.
Feel bad for everybody playing against Spike.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like maybe Johnny can pull it off, but Spike's just gonna win.
If you let Spike's card run as written, you're screwed. It's just gonna pull Black Lotus for 0 mana.
Yeah, I think you know what, I would make the fourth the fourth card would be Karen, and it's just a 0 mana, deal 1 damage to target player or to target creature, to just stop people from doing the nonsense with this.
I don't think that would kill Spike though. What Spike's
Spike's a 1/1. Yeah, so it's
there you
so
go.
At that point, no one gets to have fun except for Timmy, because
in response to that, Spike can just activate her ability over and over and pull a bunch of banned cards.
Oh yeah, no, all of this is terrible. Don't get me wrong. We're going to move on to our last card here, because I want an excuse to be able to go back to the Grand Calcutron now that I understand how it works. Our last card, and this is the one I've been dreading this entire time, is X. For a blue and a black, you can play a legendary creature, Human Spy, 2/2. As long as X is in X's owner's opponent's hand, X's owner may cast X and activate X's abilities. That opponent can't cast X and play with his or her hand revealed. For a blue and a black, you tap it, put X into target opponent's hand. For 3 generic, a blue and a black, you may play a card in the same hand as X without playing its mana cost. Okay.
Mike, you did a pretty good job there.
Well, like I said, I've been dreading it. So what this says is you can put it into somebody's hand, you can activate its ability, and that opponent can't cast it even though it's in his hand, and they play with their hand revealed. So this is you literally planting a spy in somebody's hand, and as you do so, you can then pay 5 mana to play cards from their hand without paying their mana cost. So it's weirder Send triplets.
Yeah, I was going to say Send triplets is probably the closest legal analog to this card. And we would have to write new rules to make this card work, because you cannot have a card owned by another player enter one of your exclusive zones, like your hand or your graveyard. It would go to their hand or their graveyard instead. So that would have to be rewritten. But in the rules, I'm saying it, and as this card is written with some new rules and activating abilities in hand, that exists. Got Simeon Spirit Guide has an activated ability in hand. There's lots of cards with activated abilities in hand, and playing cards out of somebody else's hand, like you just said, Send triplets. Mike, more or less, this card's probably okay.
So, with one caveat, how many times have you sat down and somebody pulled out a Send triplets deck and you went, this is going to be okay?
When I say okay, I don't mean fun to play against,
sure,
of a reasonable power level. I mean, this would more or less work for Black Border Legality.
Right.
But you're right. Nobody likes to play against Send triplets. It's miserable.
This feels like potentially easier Send triplets.
Yeah, for Send triplets,
you don't have to pay. You don't have to figure out the mana cost. It's just pay this 5 that you always have access to.
That's the number one thing that a Send triplets deck has to be able to do, is find a way to filter mana into colors,
right,
that would allow you to cast spells of a color that Send triplets isn't, and it's an Esper blue black white.
I guess the only, so help me out with this. If the only way at that point to really get rid of X is if the player that you give it to finds a way to discard it, and if they discard it, does it just stay in discard because it's in their hand, or can you replacement it, affect it?
When a card goes to a graveyard from any zone, it's going to go to its owner's graveyard.
Okay.
And I realized that kind of seems like it could get a little bit grainy with this card that it can enter an opponent's hand.
Sure.
But this card doesn't say anything about graveyards.
Okay.
If your opponent discards X, it's going to go to your graveyard. And when it does, as we're going to talk about quite shortly here, you can then choose to put it back in your command zone.
Okay. It seems like it would be viable and terrifying, and I don't like it. It makes me sad. But okay, fair enough.
It's Dimir, all right.
Okay, so that rounds out the list of our silver border potential, with air quotes, commander cards. Alex, what would you make if you were sitting here and you got to make one of these to play for your play group the next time that you're sitting down? What do you think you'd be most interested in playing?
It's an excellent question. I'm going to be honest. I think it would probably be the Grand Calcutron.
Okay.
It's such an interesting card.
It is. It's almost like its own commander variant in a commander.
Right. It rewrites the rules of the game.
Yeah. But it does it in a way that doesn't seem absolutely busted. And again, this is our opinion. We happen to share it. Mm-hmm. I totally get if somebody reads this card and is like, no, absolutely not. but that's a cool, weird thing to do.
That's the best.
So you said that one. I really like the Rakdos commanders, and I feel bad not going with Baron von Count or Griselda, the Monster Masher. I think if I had to make one of these, other than the Grand Calcutron, which again I'm going to make just as a challenge to myself at this point.
Awesome.
Phoebe, Head of Sneak. That just seems like a cool commander. I like Voltron as a win condition, because I think it's just weird. Battle cruisery, make something as big as possible and cool as possible. So the idea of literally stealing the abilities and rules of other creatures to see what Phoebe turns into sounds weird. Sounds fun. All of this sounds fun. Hopefully you guys have heard some commanders that you might want to try out. If you do, make sure you hit us at our inbox at the Social Contract EDH.
Yeah. If you made one of these, send us the deck list, man.
Absolutely. We'll send links to our email address and Twitter, Facebook, all the places that you can find us, because this is woof. There's some things to brew in this, So I'll tell you what, everybody. That was our first segment talking about these cards. We're going to take a quick break, come back with a little bit of advice for new players and older players, a couple of cards to talk about, and then Alex is basically going to explain how things work in the actual game of Magic, which I know is extremely broad, but we're going to tighten it down, and I promise it's going to be helpful to you. We'll be right back. Hey, it's Present Mike filling in for Past Mike. Our audio has gotten so much better. Thanks for sticking around with us. So we're going to talk about some cards that are really underplayed. We each think that we're bringing some really interesting cards to the table, and if you want to grab them or any other cards, you can help us out in the process. We have partnered with TCGplayer.com, so if you're looking for any singles, sealed product, deck boxes, sleeves, playmats, really anything to spice up your game experience, go to bit.ly/EDHsocial or click on the link in our show notes. You don't pay anything extra, and you'll really help us out by buying all the things you were going to anyway. That's bit.ly/EDHsocial or click the link in our show notes. Back to the show. All right, Alex. So something new, something old. For me, I'm going to be helping out players with a little bit less experience this week. So we love the actual social aspect about the game of Commander. That's part of our title. It's why we like the actual politics. But as far as the gameplay itself, I think that the best thing about Magic is the actual interaction. It's somebody plays something, you have the ability to play something in response or to counter it, or you do this other effect in response to their effect, which then gives everybody else an opportunity to respond to your... It's the interaction of it all. The one thing I'm going to advise everybody is not to fixate on it. Don't worry about how much targeted removal you have. Don't worry about how many board wipes you have. Don't worry about the ins and outs on everything. But make sure that you have some of it, because nothing feels worse than being locked out because you don't have a card that has the ability to interact with an effect on the board in your entire deck. You have to think about it like a recipe. Most recipes, they require some salt. And counter spells, Path to Exile, all these effects, they are salt. They are literally you pouring salt on somebody trying to have fun. But if you don't have it in your deck, that means that all you're doing is enabling them to just race to do what they want to do faster than what you want to do. There's nothing wrong with that if that's your play group, but don't include so much of it that you're not ever doing anything on your own. And don't neglect it so much that you don't have the ability to stop somebody from winning the game if they play any number of cards that you simply can't target. I know a lot of that has to deal with the color pie. I know a lot of that has to deal with these cards. Green is really good at removing artifacts and enchantment, etc. I understand that there's limitations. Have something in your deck that can interact with the actual board, because if you don't do that, you might as well just be playing Goldfish at home. What do you think, Alex?
Well, I agree for the most part, Mike. As a newer player, the actual distribution of interaction that you have is not that much important. What is important is that you're able to interact with popular cards that heavily impact your deck. For example, if you are a deck that gets hosed by Blood Moon, as many decks do, and you know that people play Blood Moon in your meta, you need to be able to destroy that, right? Otherwise you're going to be up the creek. And maybe there are other cards that hose you, or silver bullets, like if board wipes are consistently a problem for you, then maybe you need some reanimation, recursion. If you're more of a control deck that tends to get run over, maybe you need more board wipes, maybe you need more spot removal. But the actual distribution for a newer player doesn't matter as much. For a veteran player, based on your play group, I think just over time, playing with your pods, you're going to gain more of an implicit understanding of the distribution of interaction that you actually need, such that I couldn't possibly tell you exactly what you need. Like for me, I might run 3 or 4 board wipes, 4 or 5 counter spells, and maybe 4 or 5 pieces of spot removal. But maybe for your meta, you need more board wipes and fewer counter spells. Maybe you need more spot removal and fewer board wipes. And for a new player, again, look for times when you're playing the game and you get hosed. Note down what card that is, and see if you can't run a card that can remove it in the future.
And that's why I kind of liken it to the recipe, because I can only tell you how to make a deck that would work, hopefully in a lot of situations. And then in my play group, this is the format, this is the actual amount that usually works for me. One of the people in my play group likes to play with the gods a lot. So lots of indestructible enchantments that aren't always creatures. So I have more ways to try and exile cards than I normally would if I was playing with a different group or even playing a different deck. So again, that the amount that you actually put into it, you should have some, just because, again, interacting is fun. But playing it, revising it, changing that recipe, just be aware that it's something you're probably going to do. No deck is ever 100% finished because, frankly, they come out with new cards this year every 4 weeks, it feels like, if not more. But just tinker around with it and play with it. And if something doesn't fit, if you don't like the way that something works, then change it. Got a little bit more broad on that towards the end. So why don't we go ahead and move on to advice for some of our more veteran players, Alex?
Yeah, Mike, I'd like to recommend for veteran players this week, the next time you play Commander, maybe if you're in a healthier country that's not in the US, Europe, or Latin America, or if you're playing online with Spell Table or Tabletop Simulator or with your webcam, try a commander variant in your next game. There's a lot of them, a lot of different ones that work all different ways. Personal favorite of mine is two-headed giant, giant commander. I just think this is a fantastic way to play commander, 2-on-2, 50 life total between you. It makes sense. People know how to play two-headed giant. You get to work together with somebody as a team. It just works out great. When back in the olden times, in the long ago, before the pandemic,
the before times,
in the before times, in the ancient days, we used to play these variants in the LGS, and people loved two-headed giant. We also played Kingdoms or Emperor, as you may know it, or Bang, which is basically a game with secret roles where some people are trying to kill other people, some people are trying to protect people. You can look up the rules for that. It's quite good fun. And then there are other similar variants like that. But the long and short of it is that if you play with the same people for long enough, the same decks, the same cards, it's possible for this game to get a little stale for a veteran player. And I find that variants like this can really sort of reinvigorate your interest in the game. So try it next time.
Absolutely. And I think you're definitely onto something here. There are a lot of different variants. There are a lot of different ways to change things up, but whether it's the actual format that you're playing the game, or adding the plane chase cards, or even just starting a game where Monarch goes to first blood and just Monarch exists in the game. Stuff like that. I think you're onto something. This is something we're going to have to do a full episode on. I'm going to write it down on our list because there are a lot of fun variants, and that's our job here. Our job is to try and introduce more fun into your play sessions. So cool.
Absolutely.
One of the most fun things that you can do in your actual play group is bring out a card that people haven't seen, and they take a look and say, "Ooh, can I see that?" And we're going to move on to that right now. Alex, last week we both had 2 cards that were in less than 100 decks on EDH Rec. You barely beat me, and man, it's cool because it felt awesome to talk about cards that were in like a total of 140 decks in the entire website. So this week I was thinking about trying to do that, and then you topped yourself. So then I went the other way. So my card this week is Soldevi Adnate. This is a generic and black for a 1/2 cleric with the ability to tap it and sacrifice a black or artifact creature to add an amount of black mana equal to that creature's casting cost to your mana pool. Play this ability as an interrupt or instant. So this is a sack outlet that gives you as much black mana as that artifact creature or black creature's total casting cost. This is really cool in graveyard recursion decks. This is in my Marin deck because I have a Marin deck, because sometimes I don't feel like being a good person, even though it's more of a value generation thing, less than aristocrats. But this is a cool ability. I like this card a lot. It's in a decent amount of decks. It's in just under 1,700 out of 210,000 decks, so not quite at 1% of black decks. I totally understand there are decks that don't want to kill their own creatures, but I also understand that black decks want to do it a lot more than most other colors. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, Mike, this is a great sack outlet. I've considered running this in my Afterlife tribal deck. It's just fantastic. In the worst case, you're casting a creature one turn and taking out the mana as a mana bank next turn. But in the best case, you're reanimating that creature for less than its casting cost, or no mana at all, sacrificing it and generating mana from it. Everybody loves altars. We talked about this before. Everyone loves Ashnod's Altar. Everyone loves Phyrexian Altar. Free sack outlets are the best, and sack outlets that generate mana are the best of the best. And this is one of those. So if you're in an Aristocrats deck, Sacrifice deck, Afterlife deck, run this card in black. It's great.
Alex, is it Desecration Demon? What's the 7 mana 5/5 demon that tutors when it comes into play?
Is that Razaketh?
No, Razaketh is the legend that sacrifice other creatures. This is the one that literally, when it comes into play, you just tutor a card into your hand.
Goodness, Mike, I don't know.
Oh, boy. Well, it's one of the demons, and I'd love to tell you that I'd add it in later. But I'll search for that. That's my favorite interaction with this card, is make this tutor with a big demon, sacrifice that demon later, get 7 black mana off of it, so I'm basically tutoring for free, and reoccurring that creature later with the Marin deck. I get that is a very, this is only going to happen some of the times, but if you have the ability to recur creatures and gain mana off of actually killing them and getting those death triggers and doing all those things, it's a fun card. Other thing that we like about it, 35 cents. Not expensive. Cool little cleric. You also dealing with a budget card this week, but in far less decks, but has another really cool effect. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, this week I have a card from Urza's Saga. And this is another black card with some value on it. This is Witch Engine, which is for 5 and a black. It's a creature horror. It's a 4/4 with Swamp Walk. And it has tap, add, black, 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 black. It's 4 black. And target opponent gains control of Witch Engine. Now, I'm a judge, so obviously the most important part of this card to me is that that's not a mana ability, Mike. A mana ability is an ability that has the potential to generate mana, which this does. And it's also not a loyalty ability of a Planeswalker, which this isn't. And also, that ability can't target anything. That's the last rule. So the result of that is in its reminder text, you may activate this ability only anytime you could cast an instant. Which basically means that this can't be activated to pay costs in the middle of resolving a spell, and this also has various other timing restrictions, but we won't get too far into the weeds of that. That's just the most interesting part to me. That's text that some other cards should have that I won't mention, Savala, but this card has it. Anyway, so you're generating 4 black mana, and then another player gains control of it. I'm a fan of exchange and control of permanents. Zedru does this. Unfortunately, Zedru isn't in black, but there is a new commander that I won't spoil, but it does have black in it, and it does care about things being donated, and it's going to come out in Commander Legends, and I think that when that commander comes out, people might be interested in running this card. But this also isn't the only effect in black that donates things to an opponent. Mm-hmm. There's the goodness, I should have had this pulled up. There's an artifact that tutors that came out recently, I think at M20, that's basically you
scheming symmetry.
Use the artifact.
No, sorry.
I'm sorry?
Nothing. I was scheming symmetry.
Scheming symmetry.
You talk about tutor in black, and I get really excited about that card. I can't help it. Sorry, continue.
No, there's another one. It's an artifact in black. You tap it, you tutor something, and then you give that artifact to an opponent.
It's the monkey paw, but not called the monkey paw.
Sure, exactly. Now, this is a pretty fantastic mana ability. There's not too many cards in the game that add 4 black. There's a couple more. But even if you paid 6 for this, which you're not, you're going to reanimate this, right? That's still a pretty decent value. 6 mana to taps for 4 colored mana, that's okay. I mean, how about 0 mana to taps for 4 colored mana? And then you give it to an opponent, and they use it on their turn. And presumably they're not in a deck that can sacrifice the creature, because why would you give it to that player? And then they'll give it back to you, presumably, like Bazaar Trader. And then it goes that way. This is a political card. Maybe you'd call it a group hug style card. Mike, I just like this card. I think it's a very interesting design in black. It's 34 cents, and it's in 51 decks, which is 0% of decks.
So, okay. First of all, do not appreciate you going underneath me by 1 penny on this, but fine, whatever. Second of all, cards that we've referenced that we didn't remember the names to. One you're talking about is the Wishclaw Talisman.
Thank you.
1 generic black, enters with 3 wish counters on it. Pay 1, tap it, remove a wish counter. Tutor, give it to an opponent. Only activate this during your turn. Yes, very cool effect. And just because I knew Desecration Demon was absolutely not the right card name, and I had to go check, so I jumped out of my seat at one point and found my Rune Scarred Demon, in my Marin deck, which is the one that enters and tutors.
There you go.
Does. Cool.
So what do you think about Witch Engine, though?
I'm a fan. I like anything where cards are swapping locations and you're deciding how it's happening. And I do like that it's saying playing this ability as an instant. So it does have a little bit of a timing restriction on there without going crazy. Plus, I mean, worst case scenario, it's a 6-mana 4/4 with Swamp Walk by itself.
If you run Urborg, it's unblockable.
It's great. You know what I mean? Like, there are ways to make it work. And even if you can't, just a 6-mana, if you had a 6-mana tap and exchange control for 4 extra mana on a different turn, I like it. It's an interesting card, only in 51 decks. It should be in more. If you're in a deck that cares at all about group hug or politics, this is something that you can probably find a spot for, at least to consider putting into your deck. So awesome selection.
One of these days I need to make a black group hug deck. I just have to find something interesting to do with it.
Right. Yeah.
Find an interesting commander.
Yeah, I feel like I can give you an explanation of one you might want to look into. Big fan of Vivictus the Dire.
Oh. That's Jund. I already have a Jund deck.
Yeah, well, if you're looking for a mono black commander, well then, Alex, you know more than me. I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, well, I have a couple lined up, but again, it's like I'm very picky when I build my decks. I want to make something that's totally unique, that's nobody's ever seen before. Mm-hmm. Even if it's not any good, I still want to make that and just make people's jaws hit the floor. Like Emrakul Group Hug.
Yeah, that's fair. Alex, I have 16 decks and probably going to make more before I take them apart. Not very picky. Just want to do stuff. Yay.
Gotcha.
Yay, magic. All the cards. Flip, 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 flip. So, one of the things that we're going to make sure that we do with those cards is understand how they work, how they interact, what's the timing on things. And Alex is going to help us in our Judge's Corner this week to explain exactly how they interact with each other. What are the things that have to be determined at each point with state-based actions. Alex, this is one of those things that anytime we talk into the nitty-gritty of the rules of the formats, sometimes I get lost. And in fact, probably more than I should. Or exactly as much as I should, because it's a really complicated game and I'm doing my best here. So how about you help me and everybody listening out, and what are state-based actions and how do they actually resolve? How do they actually work?
It's a great question, Mike. State-based actions are something that a lot of people, I feel, have trouble with. Let's go ahead and talk about these today. State-based actions are basically, for the programmers out there, they're like garbage collection subroutines. They're the little cleaning nanobots that just come through whenever anything gets messed up, and they just fix everything. So whenever a player would receive priority, and I'll stop there briefly, just to make sure everybody knows about priority. Whenever anything in the game would happen, when somebody casts a spell, whenever anyone activates an ability, whenever a triggered ability triggers, and whenever a step or a phase begins, except for the untap step and the cleanup step, players are going to have a round of priority. Everybody gets a chance to do something if they want to do something at instant speed, like activate Witch Engine's mana ability, for example. However, before you receive priority, and in between each player receiving priority, something has to happen first. We have our SBAs, as we'll call them, state-based actions, are going to come in and fix everything. So whenever a player would get priority before that, SBAs are checked to see if anything needs to get cleaned up. And if something does, and we're going to talk about some of those things that we're going to clean up here, if anything does, all of those things get cleaned up at the exact same time, and then we check to see if anything else needs to get cleaned up. So it's going to keep running the garbage collection subroutine over and over and over until it says, nope, everything's clean. And then when that happens, we're going to give priority to the next player. And something that's really important here is that even though it seems like these would be just checking all the time, just over and over and over, they're always checking. They're not always checking. And one of the most important times that state-based actions aren't checked, Mike, is in the middle of the resolution of a spell. That's very important. If a spell or ability's effect is in the middle of resolving, you wait until the spell or ability is done resolving before you check the SBAs. Because during that spell, you might have a creature that's a 0/0 for some amount of time before you put counters on it, things like that. So we wait until that's done, and then we'll check some of those. So let's talk about some of these SBAs, because there's a lot of them. There's a ton. We're just going to go over a few of them today. That's, again, these will happen whenever a player would receive priority and whenever any step or phase begins. So the first one I have here is whenever a player has 0 or less life, that player loses the game. We know that one, right? That
makes sense. Yeah.
When
a player dies, they die.
When you die, you lose. Yeah, there are effects that allow you to survive past 0 life, like Phyrexian Unlife. Other than that, if you have 0 or less life, before you would have a chance to do anything, you're just going to lose. And last week, I believe, or 2 weeks ago, we talked about exactly what happens when you lose. So if you're curious about that, you can go listen to that episode. The next one I have here is if a player attempts to draw a card from a library with no cards in it, that player will lose the game. That's being milled out, right? That's why players play Laboratory Maniac, to avoid that exact thing happening. If you try to draw from an empty library, you lose. Unless you have Lab Man, and then you win. I like that effect.
Blah. Moving on.
If a player has 10 or more poison counters, they'll lose the game. Poison counters come from Infect and proliferating Infect effects. So if you have 10 or more poison counters, it doesn't matter how much life you have, you'll just instantly lose. I think players know that well enough. That's how an Infect deck works. If a token is in a zone other than the battlefield, it ceases to exist. This is something quite relevant. A lot of players don't really think about this. If you would flicker a token, when it goes to exile, it immediately stops existing as an SBA. If a token dies, it does in fact die. It goes to the graveyard, and then it immediately stops existing. It disappears. That's something that I think a lot of players have somewhat of an intuitive grasp on, but not really. The token does actually end up getting to that zone. It can be bounced to your hand. It can be flickered. It can go to the graveyard and die. But as soon as it gets there, it stops existing immediately. That's why they can't be brought back. If a creature has 0 toughness, it's put into its owner's graveyard, and it can't be regenerated. 0 toughness is specifically when you have like a -X effect, Mike, or enough -1/-1 counters, like Black Sun Zenith, things like that, where you're actually reducing the toughness to 0. You're not just killing it with marking lethal damage. As we know, if you reduce a creature's toughness to 0 with one of these effects, it doesn't matter if it has Indestructible. It just goes right through, because Indestructible cannot protect you against this SBA. Similarly, if a Planeswalker has 0 loyalty, or less than that, it's going to be put into its owner's graveyard immediately. That's basically the same thing. We all know that one. If a player controls 2 or more legendary permanents with the same name, you'll choose one of them, and every one but that one gets put into its owner's graveyard. You know that one, it's the legend rule. And that one, Mike, has actually changed many times. It's different than it used to be, and we also used to have a Planeswalker-like rule that was similar to that cared about if you had 2 different Planeswalkers of the same Planeswalker type, like 2 different Jaces or 2 different Lilianas. Luckily, we don't have that rule anymore, but now all Planeswalkers are legendary, so if you have a copy of the same Planeswalker and you control both of them, all but one of them are going straight to the graveyard. Unless you have Mirror Gallery, which is one of those cards
or it happened from Spark Double, or one of those cards that specifically says it's not legendary.
Exactly.
Kind of effects.
You can do that too.
Makes sense.
If 2 or more permanents have the World Super type, then the newest one, all except the one that had the World Super type for the shortest amount of time. So the newest one stays, the old ones go. This is the world rule. Now, we may have talked about this at some point, but there's an old card type.
We touched on worlds briefly.
There's an old card type. They're enchantments. All of them are enchantments. And they have the super type of world. And there can only be one on the entire battlefield. It's like the old legend rule, right? Before they changed it. So if you put down a second world permanent, and there's another one on there on the battlefield, then the old one goes straight to the graveyard. It's like a super duper legend rule that only cares about this one rare card type that nobody plays anymore, except for a couple of exceptions. But it's still in the game. It's still there.
Crossroads and
Concordant Crossroads.
If you have a Concordant Crossroads out, and then somebody else plays the Abyss, first of all, you worry about the player that's got the Abyss.
You worry about their wallet first and foremost, and then you worry about their mental health.
And then you also see Concordant Crossroads go away and be destroyed because now it's a much sadder world. Yeah. Holy cow! When you look at those two cards and their art next to each other, it is absolutely night and day. Just this beautiful landscape with waterfalls and lush, and then the Abyss is just these shadowy specters that are just in absolute agony. I have seen something I wish I didn't. Please distract me with the rest of the Snoopy's
Absolutely.
actions.
We'll just talk about a couple more here. If a permanent has both +1/+1 counters and -1/-1 counters on it, then it's going to annihilate in this way, right? It's going to delete enough counters, n +1/+1 counters and n -1/-1 counters, where n is the smaller of the two numbers. So basically you can think of it as like matter and antimatter. If you have one +1/+1 counter on it and one -1/-1 counter on it, they annihilate. They both stop existing. They're cleaned up because guess what? Those add up to 0/0. Now, this one I chose specifically, Mike, because you might be aware of some older types of counters that aren't used so much anymore, like +0/+1 counters and +2/+0 counters and things of that nature. You ever seen anything like that before?
I haven't, but I mean, you have a lot more experience and, more importantly, a better catalog in your brain as far as all the card types and everything along those lines. I haven't seen that before.
Well, the point is that in Magic's older years, these cards used to be more common. Frankenstein, I think, is one of those cards. There's a Frankenstein card that has, you choose whether to put like a +0/+2 counter on something. There's a bunch of weird counters like that give buffs or debuffs that aren't +1/+1 or -1/-1. What's really important is that only +1/+1 and -1/-1 counters annihilate like this, Mike. The older counters, the +1/+0, the +0/+2, all those different weird ones, none of those annihilate with each other. Even the exact opposites don't. So if you have a -2/-2 counter on something and a +2/+2 counter on something, both of those counters stay there, and you just need to do the math yourself. I'm so sorry. You have to add 2 and -2 together.
Checks out. I promise I was listening at the same time. My eyes got really big, and I immediately went to TCG Player to see that Frankenstein's Monster is about a $9 card, and I'm ordering 2.
Well, there you go.
So everybody, just so you know, in case you didn't, that's a card that exists. Happy soon to be Halloween. Have a good time.
Absolutely. This episode might even come out after Halloween, so
yeah. Well, we might change things up just because you've made me really excited with that.
Fantastic. So the last two here are unique to Commander. These don't exist in the normal game of Magic. Standard. In a Commander game, a player that's been dealt 21 or more combat damage by the same commander over the course of the game loses the game. We call that the Commander damage rule. Now, this rule is kind of contentious a little bit, Mike. We won't get too much into it, but I know there are some people who feel that the rule shouldn't even exist. There are some people who feel that all Commander damage from all commanders from all players should be combined into one single pool of Commander damage. And if
they are also wrong.
Well, regardless, those two ways that I just described aren't how it works. It has to be from a single commander. So if you have partners, each of them tracks separately, and it also tracks separately from separate players. And it's only tracking combat damage, right? It's not tracking pinging damage or any other kind of damage. Only combat damage. 21 combat damage, lose the game. And this goes way, way back. This is one of the oldest rules in Commander, back when it was Elder Dragon Highlander. And the reason why the number is 21 is because all the Elder Dragons were 7/7s. They dealt 7 damage in combat. So was a 3-shot kill or a 3-turn timer. 7 times 3 is 21. Yeah, that's that Commander rule. There's another Commander state-based action, though, And this one's a lot newer, Mike. This one didn't exist the same time last year. In a commander game, if a commander is in a graveyard or in exile, and that card was put into that zone, since the last time state-based actions were checked, its owner may put it in the command zone. Now, this is very different from how it used to work. This used to not be a state-based action at all. This used to be a replacement effect that if your commander would die, or if your commander would be exiled, instead of going into those zones, you put it into the command zone. But recently, this year, in 2020, there was a change from the rules committee. They changed the rules of commander, and those have been reflected in the comprehensive rules that now your commander will actually enter those zones. If your commander would die, it dies. It goes to the graveyard, and most importantly for decks that care about that sort of thing, like Child of Alara, it hits the graveyard, and it counts as being dead. And then, immediately after that, before any other triggers happen, you can choose to put it into the command zone if you want to. And the same goes for exile. Now, for going to hand or going to library, that's still a replacement effect. It won't actually hit those zones. And it's not one of the SBAs we're talking about because it's not a state-based action. That replacement effect does still exist. If your commander would be put into a player's hand or would be put into your library, you can say, no, it's not going there, it's going to the command zone. But for the specific case of the graveyard and for exile, you are allowed to, you really have no choice. It's going to hit those zones, and then at that point you'll choose, do I want it to stay there permanently or go into my command zone instead? Mike, you're a more, I don't know how I want to put, you're a more casual player, right? You were less familiar with the rules committee. How did you find out about this rule, or did you find out about this rule?
So I found about this rule a little bit of just, the overall community talking about it, other people posting on it. But this is one of those things that, depending on the play group that I was with, they would go back and forth on whether or not when the commander died, they actually treated it like it died and then put it back in the command zone already. Like the play group I'm playing with now, they were actually doing this rule change on accident before the rule was there. And I was fairly new to the group. I didn't want to, change things around. Also, because it makes a lot of other commanders pretty interesting. Like, Child of Alara wasn't a very cool commander. Mm-hmm. Now, it's an abusive commander in its own way. But it's, the Elena, those creatures those legendary creatures that do things when they die. Some people were already playing that I've played with, whether they knew about the rule or not. I was familiar with it. But I think I actually became familiar with it because somebody pointed out that I was doing it wrong, and then became familiar with it again because the community was talking about, oh, this changes stuff, and I know the command zone did, special mini cast talking about how is Rune absolutely broken now because, the thing it goes to exile, and then you couldn't just replace, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is one of those things I'm glad they did it. Because again, it just opens up the game. But I found out, and I don't know, you are, I think you have a wider circle of Magic, specifically with being a judge and doing this longer. Is this something that you felt was pretty well received and people were like, oh, okay, cool, and we're just ready to roll with it? Or has there been pushback?
I don't think there's been pushback at all, Mike. I think this is probably one of the more popular things that the Rules Committee has done in the past year. And maybe in another episode we'll talk a little bit more about them. But one thing that I wanted to mention is yes, I think this was quite well received. This opens up any decision that the Rules Committee makes that opens up more lines of play for players typically is well received. And this does open up new lines. Now decks like Child of Alara and Elena the Dusk Rose, now those decks don't have to run as much graveyard exile
recursion,
or recursion. Yeah. Those decks just got a lot of slots freed up to just play their commander the way they want to play it, which is great. So people liked it. But what I wanted to briefly touch on with respect to what you said is that a lot of players that you had been playing with, and even you yourself, had basically been playing this way already and not realized that was not how the commander's replacement effect worked.
Sure.
When I also listened to the Command Zone. I listened to their episode on it, and Josh Lee Kwai notably is a member of the Commander Advisory Group, which is a non-voting body adjacent to the Rules Committee that acts as a liaison between the Rules Committee and the Magic player base of Commander players at large. And this would be something that they would be probably consulted on, because it's not something directly related to banning or unbanning a card. So they probably sat on many of these meetings. And one thing that Josh Lee Kwai said was quite interesting to me, Mike. He said that several Magic players in the Commander Advisory Group, which are all very prominent Commander community members like himself, also did not know that the rule worked like this. That they were not aware that they played it like you played it. They played it like it currently is, that it let it hit the graveyard and then go to the command zone. And that was interesting to me. I'm honestly not sure how I feel about that, to be honest, because he made a good point. There are going to be casual players at all times playing the game of Commander, and just like in this podcast, I think it's strengthened by myself having a judge perspective and you yourself having a more casual, friendly perspective. That's
a really nice way of putting it. I appreciate that.
We're good friends. That even on the Commander Advisory Group, the second highest sitting body in the format, that they would have players that are casuals. And not just casuals for Commander, because Commander's casual, but casuals in Commander, like people who didn't know how a basic rule of the game works. And I think that there were quite a few people who were quite taken aback by that, and they had the reaction that, the Commander Advisory Group should know that. And I see where they're coming from. The Rules Committee, if I heard that somebody on the Rules Committee, which is comprised entirely of high-level judges, didn't know that, I would be very alarmed. However, the Commander Advisory Group is not comprised of high-level judges. They're comprised of Magic players. So, Mike, how do you feel about that when you hear that somebody on the Commander Advisory Group, multiple people, didn't know how this rule worked?
I mean, we've said it before, or I think I've said it 1,000 times, and you've agreed with me as somebody who has a very rich understanding of the game and how it works. It is the most complicated game that exists.
It really is, though.
Because every card has its own interactions, which have different rules to other things. So I'm not going to get mad when people whose job is to essentially be an advisor. They're not making the rules.
Right. They do not make the rules.
They're there as basically our agent.
There
as regular players.
People.
Yes.
But they don't
I'm
vote.
totally fine with them. I'm totally fine with them not being fully versed in every single rule, for the simple fact that it's not even 4-dimensional chess that we're dealing with. We're dealing with 6-dimensional chess combined with checkers, combined with Risk, combined with poker. Like, it doesn't bother me, because here's the thing. I played it wrong, found out that I was wrong, played it right, found another group that was playing it supposedly wrong, didn't have a problem with them playing it wrong, and then they changed the rule, and people went, oh, okay.
I thought that's how it worked already.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things where if it doesn't make everybody, if it only adds, like you said, if it only increases the amount of things that you can do, instead of limiting them, I don't think you get nearly as much of an outcry. And frankly, that's why we do this segment. That's why we have you talk to us about, hey, here are some of the things that you may think you know about it and how Magic works. But let's actually go into it, because this will interact and this changes with things. You know, this is why Cant is the most powerful word in Magic. Unless. This is why state-based actions are the way that they are and how they all work. Outlining all of those things, it doesn't mean that we're going to be judges in our own right. It doesn't mean that we're going to know how everything works. But getting a little bit more of understanding of how the game works means that if things change or if we find we're doing something wrong, instead of just knowing that we're doing something wrong, knowing why it's not the way it's supposed to be, well, that's improvement. And that's kind of what I'm focused on.
It's a very good way of putting it. That's the end of
so
my
Alex,
segment. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for taking us through that. We went a little off track with the state-based actions, but I'm glad we did. I do like just being able to hey, people that are doing this, they make mistakes too. It's relatable, guys. Everybody, don't worry. You're not as bad as you think, because the people that are the best still aren't perfect. It's all good.
Yeah.
Alex, thanks for joining us this week.
Always a pleasure, Mike.
All right, and to everybody, hope you had a good time. We'll be back next week, and until then, say yes to silver, say no to slivers. Talk to you later.